One.
Well, hello again, boys and girls. Welcome back to Grammie's Book Nook. I've been waiting for you all day, waiting for you to finish your studies for the day so that we could share some time together. Yesterday, we started reading a chapter book called Andre the Seal to be exact. And then the first couple of chapters we learned all about the Goodrich family, all about the mom and the dad, and all about the 5 children, and all about their menagerie of pets, and how Andre came to be a part of their family. So, I told you yesterday that there were some sad parts in the book, but we didn't really read them yesterday. That's where we're going to pick up today. We're going to learn what happened to the first 2 seals, Marky and Basil. So get comfy because we're going to read a few chapters and then we'll see what happens. Chapter 3, Marky and Basil. Gotta get my glasses on. Here we go. Mark was named for an island in Penobscot Bay. That's where he was born. My father knew, of course, that a seal must have its mother's milk. A seal's milk is 10 times richer than a cow's milk. It's very special milk that's made just for seals. So, to cow's canned milk, he added egg yolks and tried in every way to get little Marky to drink this formula. Human mothers can read books on the care of feeding of their babies, but there was no book on the care of feeding baby seals. So Dad just had to figure out how to make it work. As Marky got thinner and thinner, Daddy remembered the pet squirrels he had raised when he was just a little boy. His 3 baby squirrels, Tom, Dick, and Harry, wouldn't drink their milk either. And sure enough, Dad had to figure something out. So he thought and he thought, what could I do that would make these little squirrels take their milk so that they could grow plump and fat? Then he remembered squirrels love to gnaw on things. So he soaked a dishcloth in milk, and sure enough, the baby squirrels began chewing on the dish rag, and they grew fat and healthy. So now he soaked the dish rag in milk for Marky. Marky chewed on the rag, and he began to perk up. But not for very long. One morning, we woke up and found Marky dead. Later, our animal doctor friend Mac performed an operation on the baby seal and found the dish rag in little Marky's stomach. My father decided to try once more to bring a baby seal for a diving companion into our family. But first, he set out to learn all he could about harbor seals. One fall day, while cruising in the bay, he came upon a mother seal that had been killed by rifle fire. After examining her body very carefully, he discovered why he had failed to get little Marky to drink his milk. Seals scoot about on their bellies. The seal mother's nipples, where their babies drink, are set into shallow little cups and protected by a donut-shaped fatty tissue so that the nipples won't be damaged when they slide around on the rocks. Seal babies have to work hard to get their milk. They must push their little noses into those little cups in order to get their milk. The next winter, my father set about making a seal feeding station. He first took a short log and hollowed out a hole in the middle of it, and then he covered the log with a rubbery material that scuba diver suits are made of. The hole left a dimple in the log, and under the dimple he put a syringe filled with the milk formula. He made a small hole in the rubbery dimple for the tip of the syringe. I was doing my homework in the living room that night, and as he finished the feeding station, he called me into the kitchen, and he said, "Tony, do you want to try being a baby seal?" "What? Me?" I said. "Yes, you. You're the closest in size to being a baby seal that we have in our family." Thinking that being the smallest in the family certainly had its drawbacks, I got down on my hands and knees and pushed my mouth into the rubbery dimple. I sucked on the tip of the syringe. Poor Tony. Startled, I sat up. "Great, it works. But do you think it will be able to fool a baby seal?" "First," Daddy said, "we have to find a baby seal." Basil was found on the 14th of May. Daddy took my sister Sue with him that day. I wanted to go too, but I was told I wasn't big enough to be of much help. "I'll tell you what," my dad said. "If we get a baby seal, you can be the one to show him how to drink his milk." I didn't think that was very funny at all. They found Basil off of Mouse Island. Sue brought him into the house, cuddled in her arms. She was 16 and had a way with little animals, even as I had a way with little birds. While she talked soothingly to little Basil, Daddy quickly made up some formula of milk and eggs and filled the syringe. We all stood around anxiously as he set up the feeding station. This would be the greatest test. If Basil refused to drink his milk, my father would never again try to bring up a baby seal. 2 failures would be enough. And for a moment, it looked very much as if he would never have another baby seal. I guess that little seal just wasn't cooperating. We'll have to see. Sue set Basil down beside the rubber-covered log. The little seal nuzzled in a moment and then backed away. "Ha," Daddy said. "I know what the problem could be. Seal mothers are warm. I'll fix that." So he heated the dimple with warm water from the tea kettle. And that did it. Cautiously, the little seal pushed his nose into the dimple. And when he found the warmth, he pushed harder and harder until he found the nipple. In an instant, he was taking milk like a hungry puppy. Sue yelled. We all yelled and began cheering like kids at a basketball game. We made so much noise that Toot, the lazy beagle, woke up from his nap and came in to see what the fuss was all about. He took one look at the little seal and went right back to snoozing. It was almost impossible to impress Toot. Little Basil grew and grew. If our first problem had been to get him to drink milk, our next one was to get him to stop drinking it. When the time came for him to be weaned, that is, to give up milk and start eating fish, my father ground some up and added it gradually to the seal's formula. But each time Basil tasted the fish, he spit it out in disgust. By the 4th of July, Daddy decided that, like it or not, little Basil was going to eat fish. That's the only natural food for seals. My uncle was with us for the 4th of July dinner, and we were enjoying salmon, green peas, and strawberry shortcake. We always ate that at our house on the 4th of July. After dinner, Daddy said to my uncle, "Basil's going to have raw herring for his 4th of July meal, and I may need your help." So while my uncle held little Basil, my father forced the seal's mouth open, pushed a herring into it, and clamped his mouth shut until Basil was forced to swallow. Basil snorted in disgust. Another fish was forced into his mouth. But this time, Basil blinked his eyes happily as if to say, "Why, this isn't so bad after all." Then he started following Daddy all around the house, begging for more fish. And after that, he never even looked at his feeding station again. It was then that Basil stopped being a baby. Basil became a wonderful companion. Every day my father would put him in the back seat of the car and drive him down to the sea. Remember, boys and girls, this is a true story. I would have laughed if I would have seen a seal in a car driving down the road. They would swim and dive together in the harbor. Basil never wandered very far. Underwater, he would come and push his face close to my father's faceplate and peer in at him. On fine days, he would be taken out into the bay to frolic in the shallow waters around the island where he was born. It was no problem getting Basil back into the boat. Daddy only had to start the motor, and the seal would make a dash for the boat and get lifted onto the bow. He didn't want to be left alone in the great ocean. But now comes the sad part about Basil's story. One day in early August, as he was heading for home, my father looked in the bow and Basil was gone. He stopped the motor, thinking that the little fellow had gone for a quick swim in the sea. Then, to his horror, he saw blood on the water. Next, he saw a shark's fin cut the surface of the sea. In an instant, he grabbed his harpoon and drove the barb into the shark's back. The water boiled as the great fish thrashed to free himself from the harpoon. Then the shark submerged, and my father found himself being towed out to sea by the angry, wounded shark. Finally, the harpoon line went slack as the great white shark rolled to the surface and was still. Sadly, Daddy towed the great fish home to the landing, meeting there a great group of children who had come down to the waterfront to see little Basil coming back from his playtime. Later, Daddy opened up the shark, and there inside the stomach was Basil, in 3 pieces. It was a sad time for our family. After what had happened to Marky and Basil, we were all sure Daddy would never again try to bring up a baby harbor seal. But to our surprise, he decided to make one last effort. If Marky and Basil had been adorable little creatures, little orphan Andre was to be special, special, special from the very beginning. That was a hard thing to read. Chapter 4, Baby Andre. It didn't take Andre more than a day or two to become a full-fledged member of our family. He drank his milk and grew fat as a butterball. At night, he lived in the cellar in an old bathtub. During the day, he had the run of the house and the yard. Most of our other pets got along very well with him. Only Sam, the seagull, had some doubts about Andre. But seagulls have bad dispositions. They complain a lot, and they only think of their own stomachs. As for little Andre, he thought everyone was his friend. Daddy was at his desk one evening when my sister Paula called to him from the yard. "Dad, Andre just kicked Toot out of his doghouse." Sure enough, there was Toot dozing on the lawn, and Andre curled up on the hay in Toot's doghouse. At least twice each day, Daddy would take Andre for a swim. Using his flippers, Andre would bump right into the back seat of the car, and off they would go. It didn't seem at all odd to Andre to live in a house with people and to be chauffeured around the seaside in the back seat of our family car. Sometimes I would go down to the waterfront with Andre and Daddy. Now, you'd think baby seals would love to play and swim in the water, but when Daddy would toss Andre into the sea, he would pop right out again and lie in the sun. At first, Daddy was puzzled. Then he remembered watching mother seals out on the ledges trying to coax their pups into the water. They would nuzzle their babies toward the sea, and using their flippers, sometimes they would splash them with water. Finally, if that didn't work, they would push the pups into the water. Maine's ocean water is icy, icy cold. And Daddy realized that baby seals don't have thick layers of fat to keep them warm. In good time, he said, little Andre would be ready and eager to swim. Within a few weeks, Andre said goodbye to his bottle and began eating raw fish. That day didn't come soon enough for Daddy, who had to get up in the middle of the night to make formula. This really amused Mother. For years, she was the one who got up at night to warm bottles for 5 children while my father lay in bed. Once Andre began to eat fish, life was much simpler for all of us. Sometimes Daddy would take him to the harbor and leave him overnight. I'd go down early in the morning, and there Andre would be under the town float. He'd always be happy to see me. He'd bounce up and down in the water, making soft little pleading sounds. When I said I thought it was cruel to leave him alone all night, overnight, my father looked at me right in the eye and asked me what I planned to be when I grew up. What a strange question. I thought for a moment. My brother Steve was going to be an engineer. Sue wanted to be an animal doctor. Carol wanted to be an actress and travel all around the world on a yacht. Though I mostly wanted to own a zoo, I just said, maybe I'll just grow up. Well, Andre's going to be grown up when he's 2 or 3, Daddy said. But first he must learn to catch fish for himself and be on his own so he'll be able to take care of himself. What? You mean we can't keep Andre forever? When Andre is ready to join other seals in the bay, don't you think it would be wrong to keep him, Daddy asked. That night in bed I cried and cried, thinking about Andre ever leaving us. It didn't make it any easier knowing that my father was right. One day in late June, when Andre had been left in the harbor overnight, I went down to the waterfront with Daddy. He kept frozen herring in a freezer, and each day he would throw a few fish out to Andre. As usual, Andre was waiting right there under the town float. But what happened next was very, very unusual. When his little whiskered face popped up out of the water, he looked at the herring and said, "No fish today. I don't need any fish today, thank you." Well, of course he didn't really say that in words, because we all know that animals don't talk. But smart Andre was saying without words, "You just keep your silly herring. I found myself fresh fish." Daddy was terribly excited. "Good boy," he cried. "Good boy, Andre. You've learned to catch fish on your own." The little fellow certainly looked pleased with himself. I tried to look pleased too, but all I could think was that Andre was no longer a baby. One day soon, he would head out into the sea, and we would never see him again. Chapter 5, Andre's First Summer. Though by early July, Andre was not as easy an armful to carry. Daddy brought him home every other day to be with the family and to teach him a few simple tricks, like rolling over and clapping his flippers. Well, I hoped that Andre wouldn't ever run off to sea. All the same, I was very uneasy. Our cock robin Reuben had once gone off with a flock of robins one fall. Our flying squirrel Charlie had simply disappeared into the woods one spring. Then, just when I began to think that Andre was happy being in the Goodrich family, he began running off, although not that far. When I was little and told to stay in the yard, I would wander off for short distances. Like little boys and girls, Andre, too, was very curious about the world around him. At first, he would be gone overnight, and then he started disappearing for a day or two. We'd all be worried. It would be natural for him to want to live with other seals, but what if Andre didn't know that he was a seal? Wouldn't a little old lady be frightened out of her wits if she were to find a seal asleep on her porch? Once, after Andre had been gone for 3 days, my father drove his car all along the coast looking for him. While he was gone, Mother got a phone call from someone in Camden, a town 2 miles away. Andre was there on the wharf, showing off his few tricks to a crowd of people. So Mother went to Camden and picked him up and brought him back home again. A few days later, he went off again. This time he was gone for a whole week. Then we got a phone call from a man in another harbor town. Luckily, he had heard about Andre, and so he wasn't startled when he found our seal curled up in his rowboat. When my father went to pick Andre up, the seal wanted to play. Every time Daddy tried to grab him, Andre dived under the water and popped up again just out of reach. Annoyed, Daddy said sternly, "Enough of this nonsense, Andre. If you don't want to ride home, you can just swim home." So, Daddy drove back to Rockport and waited at the waterfront for Andre. Andre appeared about a half an hour later. He must have realized that Daddy had had enough. He'd had enough of his nonsense and made no fuss when he was picked up and taken home. I guess Andre learned his lesson. But that was just the beginning of Andre's friskiness. When he was in the cellar in his bathtub, his favorite trick was to lie low until one of us went by, and then he would splash us with his flippers. Once he soaked me when I was dressed in my very best clothes. I decided it was high time to give this little rascal a dose of his own medicine. So a few days later, I went down to the waterfront to visit him, carrying a big syringe filled with water. And when he popped out of the water to say hello, I squirted him right in his face. I thought, well, this was going to teach Andre some manners. But boy, was I wrong. He loved being squirted, and he thought it was a great game. Then he decided to play hide and seek. One summer day when the tide was low, my sister Sue and I found him in the shallows of Goose River, a little stream that flows into the Rockport harbor. Each time Sue went to grab him, he would swim off and hide behind some floating seaweed. He'd wait for Sue to find him, and then he'd swim off to another hiding place. He was a little rascal. Sue waded out into the water to search for him and happened to look behind her. "Look at him," she laughed. "This little brat thinks he's hiding." And there was Andre, scooched down with some seaweed draped over his eyes. He didn't realize that his whole rump was sticking up way out of the water. Wasn't he surprised when Sue simply walked over and picked him up? By the end of that first summer, Andre had become a waterfront character, especially to the fishermen, who aren't exactly fond of harbor seals, because seals eat fish. And fishermen who catch fish for a living think that fish are only for people. But seals think that fish are for seals. Still, the Rockport men found it hard not to like friendly Andre. They knew he enjoyed having his belly rubbed. When lobstermen rowed out to their boats, Andre would come up alongside and roll over, and the men would rub his belly with their oars. He began taking naps in fishermen's rowboats or yachtsmen's dinghies, or he would fall asleep on the lobstermen's wharfs. His favorite napping place was at Howard Kimball's wharf. Howard Kimball was a lobsterman, and he sometimes found Andre a bit of a nuisance, for the seal had a habit of sleeping in Howard's rowboat when Howard needed to be in it. When Daddy learned that Andre was becoming a nuisance, he said to Howard, "Look, Andre needs a little bit of discipline. If he's in your boat, when you need to take it out, you just spank him with your oar." "Oh no, I couldn't do that," Howard said. "Well, Andre's sort of a friend of mine." "Then how's he ever going to learn what he can do and what he can't do?" Daddy said. "He's still just a kid." "Don't you discipline your kids when they're naughty?" Daddy asked. "Okay," Howard agreed. "Maybe I'll just paddle him a little bit." Andre's special friend was Howard's boy, El Ray, who always took time from helping his father to play with our seal. All in all, it was a happy, lazy summer for Andre. But summers don't last forever. As the days grew shorter, the nights became cold. The oak and maple leaves turned red and gold. And like us, Elroy was off to school during the day, and there was no one for Andre to play with. Soon all the little boats were taken out of the water, and the floats hauled up on the land for the winter. There were few places for Andre to sun himself and sleep. Though Daddy didn't say anything, I knew he was worried. What would happen to Andre when winter came and the harbor froze over? Since he still refused to eat any frozen fish offered to him, we knew he was catching fish for himself. But like the birds, fish go south for the winter, and soon there would be no fish for Andre to catch. By now, too, little Andre had become Big Andre, much too big to be carried home to live in a bathtub. In December, skim ice began to form around the edges of the harbor. There was no problem there for Andre. He simply broke a hole in the thin ice, and as the ice got thicker, he kept the hole open. Then he would pop out to say hello if he saw one of us standing on the shore waving to him. One night, there was a terrible storm. It was a wild nor'easter. I lay in my bed, hearing the wind howl. Sleet and snow lashed against my windows like some wild animal wanting to get in. When I heard Daddy get up at dawn, I knew that he was going down to the waterfront to look for Andre. I got up too and put on my very warmest clothes and went with him. The seas were raging. The ice had broken up in the wind, and Andre's hole had disappeared. I could only see jagged ice floes grinding and buckling in the black water. Daddy stood at the edge of the seawall, staring out over the harbor, and finally turned away. "Andre's gone," he said. "Let's go home." Then he realized that gone wasn't exactly the right word to use in breaking the sad news. Andre's left, he said. That sounded better, but not much better. So that's where we're going to stop for today. We'll pick up tomorrow and see what happened to Andre. It's pretty exciting having a baby seal in your family. It's an adventure, that's for sure. I can't wait to come back the next time and find out where Andre went and how he did during that big winter storm. But for now, we just have to zoom along. But before we do that, you know what we have to do, right? We need to sing our hand washing song. I do this at the end for 2 reasons. The first reason is because I like to sing it. It makes me feel happy when I do it. And the second reason is because sometimes boys and girls are just joining us for the first time and maybe they never heard this song. So if you know the song, you can help me sing it, and the other boys and girls who are new will be able to hear it and join us the next time. So is everybody ready? Hands up. Sleeves up. Here we go. Wash those germs away, strong and healthy every day. I make wise choices so I stay well, and I wash those germs away. Remember, get under those nails. Wash those germs away, strong and healthy every day. I make wise choices so I stay well, and I wash those germs away. I make wise choices in every way, and I wash those germs away. So goodbye for now, boys and girls. Remember, there's no one more special than you. You're perfect just the way you are. Bye. See you next time.